This Clippers team is poised to make one of the deepest runs in franchise history. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them in the Western Conference, even the NBA Finals himself. And the engine of that is James Harden. Apologies are necessary. It's scary hours now. Play ball. Okay, I was wrong. But why is that? As a self-proclaimed Harden stan, I had to find out. I scoured through game film, statistics, even talked to his old college coach to figure out, why does James Harden choke in Game 7? To start out, let's look at Harden's playoff statistics. He's not a bad player in the playoffs. If anything, his stats still look like James Harden. Since he joined Houston, he's averaged 25, 7, and 6 on 42% shooting in the playoffs versus 27, 8, and 6 on 44% shooting in the regular season. It's a dip, sure, but players see a dip in the playoffs, particularly when they're the focal point of the offense, which, as I harp on in my James Harden defense video, James was on the level of Jordan and Wilt when it came to focal points. As Tom Haberstroh points out in his article about James Harden and Game 7s, he doesn't really diverge from the norm when it comes to superstar dips in the playoffs. What Haberstroh uses here to define performance is game store, which he says here operates like PER, per Basketball Reference. When comparing the superstars and the difference in production between the playoffs and Game 7, James Harden doesn't stand out in particular. If anything, he did better than Kobe Bryant, who is the Black Mamba. So what Haberstroh does here is assert that Harden is more efficient in other things other than scoring. He leads all players in steals per game in Game 7s. He's tied with Tim Duncan on blocks per game, and he's fourth all time when it comes to assists in Game 7s. So I disagree with Haberstroh when he starts talking about the three-shot foul theory, which is where he attributes Harden's lack of scoring to him three-point foul baiting. There was a play where Harden did try and draw a foul, and he didn't quite get it, but obviously this is because it's Russell Westbrook, his NBA best friend, and he knows exactly how to guard Harden's step-back threes. So Russ knows not to crowd his landing space and not to foul. What Haberstroh argues here is that James has only gotten 2 3-point fouls in 7 career Game 7s, which is about 32% less than what he normally gets. And that's the reason his three-point percentage goes from 35% to 22%. You could argue about the merit of that, but it doesn't explain why he takes so little shots. Well, believe it or not, Gilbert Arenas said it best.
I know he's gonna turn into, I'm gonna make the right play.
Yep.
If we take a look at the possessions in the past Game 7, you see for the first few plays that James didn't even attempt a shot before trying to feed his teammates. If we take a look at the first Clippers offensive possessions, we find that Harden is at the center, not as a scorer, but as a playmaker. We see that Harden doesn't even try to get himself involved. Instead, he looks for the open man. I mean, the first 3 to 4 plays, we can keep looking at these plays. How many of these are directly because of Harden? He had 1 shot attempt in the first quarter, and it was literally a bomb. And it was literally because he literally had to. And that was the issue. James Harden loves to make the right play. Gil says something that's absolutely perfect for this.
I know there's no one else on this roster capable enough to put me in foul trouble, get people fouled out, put 40 free throws up. Only you and Jokic is capable of doing that. And I know if you get doubled, you're gonna play the right way. So my game plan for James Harden in closeout game is, hey, show him we gonna double. We want him to have 20 assists. Fuck that.
And that's exactly what the Nuggets did. And once Harden saw that he wouldn't be able to make space easily, he just deferred. There are times that Brown was on him and he just decided to pass the ball, which made me wonder, has that always been the case? So I started to do some statistical sleuthing, and I looked into the passes per minute that James Harden would have in the regular season, the playoffs, and a Game 7 to determine whether or not he was just the guy to pass the ball off. By the way, I didn't count 2017 because he was quite literally playing through a concussion in Game 6. I'll leave a link in the description below to a website that proves it. In the first Game 7 that he played, his passes per minute would trend downwards, leading to the Golden State Warriors Game 7 where he only passed 1.05 times per minute, a far cry from his 1.44 in the regular season. In 2020, the Game 7, the playoffs, there wasn't really much different, it was around 1.4. In Brooklyn as well, the last 2 elimination games in which he played, and played rather poorly, he also passed the ball less than he normally would. But after Brooklyn, we're able to find noticeable differences in non-elimination versus elimination games. When he played for Philadelphia in 2023, I didn't count 2022 because that was yikes. He averaged 1.57 passes per minute versus in the last 2 games where he averaged 1.74. In the 2004 playoffs, before the elimination Game 6, he averaged 1.48 passes per minute, and in Game 7, 1.68. And in this year's playoffs, pre-Game 7, James averaged 1.47 passes per minute, And in Game 7, 1.75 passes per minute, almost 20% more than in the rest of the series. In the past 3 years, James has been passing more in elimination games. Now backed by my very rudimentary statistics, but something is there. Back in his prime years, he just happened to shoot it terribly. But ever since he left the Nets, in his biggest moments, he defers. Believe it or not, this is an issue that Harden has dealt with since 2009, before he was drafted into the NBA. If we look back at the 2009 NCAA tournament, ASU versus Syracuse, well, we can't look, there's no footage. I mean, it's that old, I guess. Isn't that weird? We see that Harden had the exact same problem. Let's take a look. All-American Harden held in check, scores only 10 points. Harden did nothing. In the first half, he didn't score a single point. He was really passive. He was ice cold from deep, shooting 0-5 from long range. He was hesitant to drive against the zone and took spot-up jumpers more often. He had a turnover passing the ball out of bounds. And this is what James Harden said when he was a 19-year-old sophomore at ASU. My teammates talked to me in the locker room. They said they need me. I shouldn't have waited until the second half. I should have been as aggressive as I was in the first half as I was in the second. So I came across this article and I came across this quote, which really intrigued me. I wanted to know if this has been a prevailing trait for James, stemming from being that 19-year-old sophomore. So I contacted his old coach, Herb Sendek, and got his thoughts. In times where it counts, one of his biggest criticisms, or that people criticize him for, is that habit of, not being the scorer he typically is in the NBA, more so being that willful passer. There seems to be like a common thread in James's career. I wanted to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I don't see any need to contribute to that dramatic narrative. This guy is among the truly transcendent, legendary players of all time. Okay, and so I don't see any purpose in trying to thread a needle to find some way to diminish what he's accomplished. The guy is among literally the all-time greats to ever play. And I suppose if one wants to sit back and criticize, that's their prerogative. I would say he has a feel for what is needed, and he has a great feel for what the defense is dictating. You don't get to become the scorer and the playmaker he is by deciding ahead of time what you're going to do. I mean, I remember a game we played at Oregon State, and he literally got trapped every time he had the ball, anywhere on the court, including the concession stand. So that game, he took very few shots, scored very few points, okay? But we played 4-on-3 because they had two guys on him constantly. And so as a result, we won the game. James didn't score that night a great many points, but he was a great teammate, and he laid it in the locker room afterwards. I could also tell you, I sat there days and nights when he scored 40 plus.
So another criticism about Harden is that I don't think it's based in truth, but I wanted to hear from a first-hand perspective. When he takes a loss, there's kind of this like nonchalance to him. It seems as if it doesn't really matter. Not attending media interviews after he plays bad. It seems as if people think he's not a guy who cares. And I wanted to hear what you thought about that and what you've seen from him personally at your guys' time together.
Well, of course he cares. How could you possibly be the competitor and player that he is, and on the other hand, say he doesn't care? I mean, those two statements are completely inconsistent and incongruent. He cares a great deal. Now, different people have different ways of showing emotions, of handling a loss, of grieving a loved one, so once again, I just think it's incredibly audacious and presumptuous to think that you can pass judgment on how another person feels and based on your limited exposure to that person. It's not like these critics are like hanging out with him or inside his heart and mind. Would it make him care more if after a loss he went and he broke a bunch of stuff and cussed a lot? Would that somehow make it any better? How does that help anything? Or if he would, go back into the locker room or show up at the press table and just start crying, then we could say he cared. I mean, it's a ridiculous narrative again, because people have different ways of handling adversity, and the people who are, making these judgments are doing so from the remote bleacher seats. I think that's part of the problem with sports journalism today, to be honest with you. And here you have a great, legendary, transcendent player, and in the, the twilight of his career, we're going to go back now and we're going to, try to nitpick it to get hits and or to create viewers, and it's really ridiculous.
That, ladies and gentlemen, was James Harden's college coach. The sentiments that he had, do they not ring true? Albeit coming from a man that spent 2 years as his mentor. Can we not see the objectivity in those words? A fantastic, transcendent player, in the twilight of his career, making the right play, sincerely caring about his team, and yet all these labels, created from people from the remote bleachers. Is James Harden a choker? You could label him as that. But first and foremost, and this has always been, a brilliant player, a terrific worker, an amazing teammate, but just not a riser, because he has to make the right play, even when it's the wrong thing to do. Thanks for watching.